Clelia, and I work as a librarian at the Ames Public Library.
And I'm Amanda, also one of the librarians here at Ames Public Library.
We're here to give you some recommendations for our third annual 12 to Try Reading Challenge. For the month of August, the challenge is a memoir written by someone who doesn't live in the United States. Stay tuned for our suggestions, or come to the library and check out our display promoting the challenge. Amanda, what is your first book?
My first book that I'm going to talk about is titled Fire in Every Direction, and this is by Tareq Baconi. So let me tell you a little bit about this one. It's an honest, moving memoir that takes us from the Middle East to London and from 1948 to the present, following the author's life. It's a coming of age and a love story combined, addressing both the personal and political. It talks about Tareq's family history of displacement, starting in 1948, when his grandmother Eva would flee Haifa, Israel, as Zionist militias seized the city. In the late 1970s, she would flee Beirut with her daughter Rima, as the country was in the throes of a civil war. In Amman, the family would eventually obtain the comfort of middle-class life, though young Tareq would still feel trapped by cultures of silence, by a sense of not belonging, by his own growing awareness that he is in love with his childhood best friend, Ramzi. After relocating to London for college, you can feel how the author feels alienated, living between cultures, with a search of trying to belong, both in a physical sense and a more spiritual sense. Queerness is policed back in Amman, just like being Palestinian is abroad. Baconi ties together his own personal experiences with the broader struggles of Palestinians and seamlessly describes how personal and political histories shape individual lives. This is a memorable account of hope, the universal search for belonging, and the journey of finding oneself. It may resonate with some and will certainly leave a lasting impression with all. I highly recommend checking it out.
For my first choice, it's a book about a heavy topic, but it is definitely worth reading. It is a memoir called Wave by Sonali Deraniyagala from 2013. It's a first-hand, moment-by-moment account of a tsunami that hit Sri Lanka in 2004. The author was on vacation there with her family and her parents, and her parents, husbands, and 2 children were all killed in the disaster, but she survived. They were visiting a national park, and she survived by hanging onto a tree branch. The book starts, "I thought nothing of it at first. The ocean looked a little closer to our hotel than usual. That was all. A white foamy wave had climbed all the way up to the rim of sand where the beach fell abruptly down to the sea. You never saw water on that stretch of sand." So it's, brutal to read and very nerve-wracking, but told in very spare, descriptive language that's emotionally devastating, but also just like a, very boots on the ground account of what happened in each moment, which is very intense, but it's a great record of that disaster. I read this at probably 10 years ago. I was on a train trip and I just had this book with me, and I read it, I think, in one sitting, and it's always stuck with me. It explores the really individual human scale of this unimaginable huge tragedy that you hear about, but it's hard to really understand the impact. It's about the trauma and the shock of that kind of a disaster and the grief that she carried for years afterwards. She also shares a lot of memories of her family and the people that she lost, and kind of memorializes them in the book too. And it's a great memoir about how to carry on when life feels impossible, when you've been through something so intense. And it's beautifully written. It's, an emotional experience, but I think definitely worth reading.
Yeah, I would say I understand why that stuck with you for so long.
Yeah,
that would be really tough, but sounds really good.
It was hard to forget.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm back at it with another slightly heavy topic, but one that I think is really interesting and, good to read about and hear from someone else's perspective who's going through it. So this is Traces of Madness. It is written by Fernando and illustrated by Pellejer. And this is graphic memoir. So it follows an individual who grew up in the Iberian Peninsula and describes himself as someone who hears voices in their head. He believes he had one episode when he was 9 years old, but none after that until the age of 19. And so this is when things really start happening for him, and he has more like psychotic episodes. He describes his life at that point. Things got much worse in a matter of months. My anxiety was growing. I was convinced I knew what others thought of me at every moment. A classic symptom of mental suffering, thinking that others spend their time judging you. His mental suffering is often depicted as a horned monster following him in the illustrations. And so I'm just going to flip through real quick so you can kind of see, because I thought this was really well done and kind of sets the tone of the illustrations. Like a lot of it's in like black and blue, and you can see there's a few pages here where like
Oh, that's really cool.
that horned monster is like one of the things that's in color. It's always yellow. So it really adds to the whole effect of the memoir, in my opinion, with all those illustrations. So he begins to live in a perpetual state between rejection and reproach, and caused a lot of damage to his relationships. His family doesn't want to know about his mental health, part social stigma and part lack of emotional intelligence. There were some very intense insights in this book talking about how we think of psychological suffering as being in our head, but it often involves the rest of our body too. When you lose control of what's happening in your head, you also lose control of other parts of your body. He talks about how scary it is when you face the very real possibility that you can't come back from this and you'll be lost for good. He describes how isolating, tormenting, and terrifying it can be. Another quote I wrote is when he says, "But when traces of madness start defining your surroundings, other people seem not to wonder why. That's the problem. They respond to you with a volatile mix of fear, ignorance, and calculated indifference." This graphic novel does not dramatize or glamorize. It gives a very personal, vulnerable, and real look at what living with schizophrenia is like for this person. He beautifully describes how scary it is to come back to your head and have no one there, but he feels very lucky to have people that were there for him. Love and humor were his refuge. It wasn't easy to find them, but he guarded them carefully. He's honest with readers, telling them about how madness isn't easy, and talking about your own madness is even harder. So this graphic memoir is a rare opportunity to better understand what people may be experiencing or going through when they have a mental health crisis or experiencing psychosis, and offers readers a chance to view people with empathy and care. So it's a fascinating read. Highly recommend it. And something I thought was interesting between these two books is that they have a theme of like confronting yourself honestly and refusing to be silenced. So I thought they both provide a really inspiring message. So
That's so cool.
yeah,
I hadn't heard of that. That sounds really interesting.
it is. And I really enjoyed the illustrations too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, my last choice. This is a memoir called Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which I love. It's a memoir about the author's childhood in working class England. She is an acclaimed novelist, but this is about her early years. She was adopted by these severe Pentecostal parents, and she grew up in this kind of like harsh, confining environment, and soon realized that she was gay, and that was not okay with people around her, and also that she felt like she was destined to explore the world more and have like a bigger life. The title is taken from what her mother said when she first tells her that she's in love with a woman. And the memoir is really about her self-invention through her teen years and into her young adult years. Discovering literature and poetry was a huge catalyst for change in her life, and imagining life outside the bleak world that she found herself in. She shaped these life experiences into fiction, and her first novel, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, is heavily based on her childhood. So this is a cool companion read to that too. I would say it's moving without being sentimental, and it's written with a great poetic eye for detail. It's gritty and real, and also like a very nuanced portrait of a particular time and place, which is interesting. It was also named one of the New York Times' 50 best memoirs of the past 50 years. back in 2019, which is a great list, but definitely highly recommend. It's a very interesting look into her life.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds great.
So we hope you take these suggestions and join us with the 12 to Try challenge.
Yeah, stop in, check out some books.